Hey, what's going on, everyone? How you guys doing today? My name is Matt Jarbo. This is $3 Theater. And man, oh man, the last 24 hours have been a wild, wild ride. If you've been following any of the drama surrounding the Hawkeye series. Now, this, of course, is the new Disney Plus show, right? Going to be coming out 2021. It was actually announced back in April of last year, saying here the Hawkeye miniseries starring Jeremy Renner and works at Disney Plus. And this kind of came out of nowhere, right? Nobody really expected them to do a Hawkeye show. Nobody really expected them to dive into doing anything with this character past Endgame, mostly because it's Jeremy Renner and nobody really gave it any credit. However, this is how it broke down. According to the Hollywood Reporter here, it says that the project will center on Clint Barton, the superhero archery expert Renner has played in the MCU since 2011's Thor. The miniseries is planned as a jumping off point for Barton to be able to pass on the Hawkeye mantle to his young protege, Kate Bishop, who in the comics is a member of the Young Avengers and has starred in the Hawkeye series from Matt Fraction and Alex Aja. The comic book series, which launched in 2012, earned an Eisner nomination and centered on the student-teacher relationship between Barton and Bishop. And this was something that a lot of people really responded to positively because they were like, "Oh my God, who's gonna play Kate Bishop? Who's gonna be able to take on that role? Who's gonna be the next Hawkeye in the MCU?" And a lot of people pointed their fingers, I mean, especially me, at Hailee Steinfeld as Kate Bishop. There was a rumor that came out that Marvel really, really, really wanted her. This was running a few months ago. People were jumping all over this, talking about it. And it seemed kind of weird at the time because we know that she was working with Apple TV on the Dickinson show, and we weren't too sure where that was going to go. But she commented here, and she said this back in November, right around the time that Dickinson was getting ready to launch. I actually think it was like the day before. And she says that there's nothing that's happening, right? There's been no comment she can really make on this one. And this was actually brought up again just the other day over on the Marvel spoilers subreddit, where a guy here posted a picture of Hailee Steinfeld. This was from yesterday at a meet and greet, and he said that he asked her about being in Hawkeye playing Kate Bishop, and she just smiled and said no comment. So to him, he interpreted that as being, well, we're still currently in discussions here. They're still currently in all of those types of, the negotiations, as that always tends to go. But looking over here at Rotten Tomatoes at the Dickinson tomato meter, we can see that the show's actually doing quite well, at least in the review process, if you want to believe Rotten Tomatoes, that is. However, and this is just my question to you, does anyone actually pay attention to that? Does anyone actually have Apple TV? Is anyone here actually watching Dickinson to see whether or not it's a good show or not? And this is why I think that the conversations are still ongoing. Obviously, Apple TV has kind of got first dibs on Hailee Steinfeld right now, and they're going to either renew the show or cancel the show. The way it's looking is they're probably going to renew it because they want to show that there's going to be faith in the product. But as for the Hawkeye show itself, we literally have no idea what's going to be happening, even though I do personally believe that she will end up being Kate Bishop. Marvel's in a position to have time to wait, which is why yesterday was such an interesting thing when it came to discussing the Hawkeye show, because out of nowhere, from this scoopster by the name of Charles Murphy, from a little blog here called Murphy's Multiverse. Now, I've heard of this guy before, but I've never really heard of him breaking stories. I've never really heard of him in that regard. He posted this exclusive Marvel Studios Hawkeye series delayed indefinitely. And this brought a lot of people to the table to talk about the situation. In fact, he says here, production of Marvel Studios' planned Disney Plus series Hawkeye has been postponed indefinitely. Originally scheduled to begin production this July, the series has now been removed from the studio's 2020 production schedule. While the news is sure to disappoint fans, the signs have been pointing to a possible delay over the past several weeks. The studio has moved Miss Marvel into an April start of production and is already casting for Moon Knight and She-Hulk, both of which will film ahead of Hawkeye, meaning that while we may not see the Avenging Archer when we thought we would, the bid production keeps on turning. Changes to the future of the MCU necessitated the production delay, which is not the first delay on Hawkeye. The cascading changes, which will allow for some plot points of the larger ongoing narrative of the MCU to ahead of the series, have moved Hawkeye quite a way down on the production list, quite possibly out of 2020 entirely. An indefinite delay does not mean the end of Hawkeye and might give time for Hailee Steinfeld, said to have been in negotiations for the series lead Kate Bishop, to work itself out in the series and for her to continue. Now, I agree with that. To be fair with you, I agree with like it being pushed a little bit down the way, and to allow Hailee Steinfeld to finish up what she needs to finish up for those negotiations to get clenched up in order to come and do this. That would basically be the only reason to delay it. I know that there have been other things that have popped up with Jeremy Renner, which we're going to talk about here in a second, that would probably help people like get to that narrative. And the sad thing is a lot of people did. Now, like some sites reported it as being just standard news. You had the Showbiz cheat sheet here saying that this Disney Plus Marvel series may be delayed indefinitely due to changes within the MCU, and more or less just kind of regurgitating what Charles had said. Of course, you had Jeremy Conrad from MCU Cosmic running all over Twitter. Oh, it's delayed, it's delayed, it's delayed. But what got my attention, what really got my attention, what got under my gears, was this report here from Cosmic Book News. And they're not the only one to run with this particular type of headline, saying Hawkeye shelved amid Jeremy Renner controversy. Now, at no point, because we read the whole article that Charles put out there, right? Those 3 paragraphs that he put out there, at no point in time did it ever say that there was any kind of Jeremy Renner controversy, right? At no point in time did it say that. Well, even this was even echoed by We Got This Covered that says Hawkeye TV show delayed indefinitely, partly due to Jeremy Renner, right? Again, this real clickbait nonsense written by a guy named Christian Bone, or it doesn't even really matter. But they're running on this idea that the show is being delayed because of Jeremy Renner and his problems. Now, to look at the We Got This Covered article, this will give you an idea about the nonsense here. It says, insider Charles Murphy is claiming that Marvel has a major reshuffling of its TV output, which has left Hawkeye at the bottom of the pile. This is supported by the fact that Miss Marvel has been moved up to the start of production. Casting apparently has already begun for Moon Knight and She-Hulk, and all 3 of these shows were originally due to follow Hawkeye, but are now expected to shoot ahead of it. Shooting ahead of it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be done before it, right? I mean, Moon Knight, She-Hulk, and Miss Marvel are all going to be effects heavy. They're very effects heavy shows. Hawkeye, not so much. It's a lot more practical effects. It's archery. It's a lot of archery. That's all it really is. But this is where it goes on to dive into the Jeremy Renner situation, saying here that some of you may be wondering whether this delay is to do with the troubling allegations made by Renner against his ex-wife in recent months. And it seems that, at least in part, the MCU, or at least partly, as MCU Cosmic explains. All right, going back to this article here from Jeremy Conrad, who had to bring that up, right? Again, not connected at all, but still trying to find a way to bring it into the fight. So he says here, his wife dominating gossip sites has put something of a dampener on the whole development of the series. They aren't removing the star of the show over an internet cancel mob, especially after the James Gunn situation, but a delay would also help that stuff dissipate from the TMZs of the world. Well, here's the thing. When you look at Hawkeye as a whole, and you look at Jeremy Renner, yeah, that came up a couple months ago. Nobody at this point is even remotely talking about that kind of stuff. Nobody is talking about the Jeremy Renner custody battle situation, and it is a bad situation, and there's been some pretty bad allegations, but Disney is not removing anyone. They're not bringing it up at all. And all of these sites that are running on that clickbait saying that this is Jeremy Renner's fault are just doing it to re-drum up nonsense, adding more to basically fake news. And I say fake news because this is something that popped up today. Julia Alexandra, who's a writer for The Verge, here says, news can absolutely confirm this is untrue. Disney contacts have vehemently denied it, calling it completely inaccurate. And a lot of people are kind of breathing a bit of a sigh of relief at this thing. They're very happy that the whole situation is starting to kind of dissipate. And even Charles himself, has updated it by saying here, according to Verge reporter Julia Alexandra, the Disney reps have denied the veracity of this report, calling it completely inaccurate, following that up on Twitter by saying we can come back and revisit this when all the evidence presents itself. If I was wrong, I'll own it. I'm not afraid to be wrong. I'm interested to see which claim is supported by evidence at this point, and if Hawkeye suddenly gets back on track for July, then good for us. And that is the right attitude to take. That really is the right attitude to take in this situation, because when you think about this show and you think about what's happening with this show and you think about all of these things that's been going on with Jeremy Renner and all the cancel culture stuff, it does kind of feel like this report from Charles, if true, does throw a little bit of gasoline on that fire. And at least he's coming out and saying, look, I can absolutely be wrong. Now, I reached out to Mikey Sutton, who I'm friends with and who's kind of tossed me a few scoops every once in a while. And I asked him if he heard anything about this. And he said, no, there's nothing that he heard about it. And his response to me ultimately was, do you see Deadline, Hollywood Reporter, or Variety reporting on any of this? And the answer to that is no. None of them reported on any of it. It was just the little blogs and the little websites that needed to rely on clickbait in order to get the story out there. Now, I will say that, some people have been updating it, right? Jeremy Conrad here did update it, saying here that it may not be delayed, but it's not actually it's not the same article. Charles actually updated the same article with it, and a lot of other outlets have just updated their original article. Jeremy here wrote a whole other post about the whole thing maybe not being delayed, and he's getting kind of raked over the coals on Twitter for spreading fake news and then not just kind of fixing it and playing up more of trying to get as much clickbait out of it as humanly possible. And that's the game he wants to play, and that's entirely fine. I just thought that was pretty funny because I noticed it as I was researching this particular topic. Now, the way I view it is this: when you have a show or when you have a situation like Kevin Feige and Marvel Studios and the MCU and Disney Plus and all of these shows that are now going to be coming down the pipeline, they're going to be coming out and connecting to a larger, grander MCU. When you have that entire situation, things are going to get shuffled around. If you have the case where you've got the star that people want in the movie. People want Hailee Steinfeld as Kate Bishop. They want her to play this role. They want her to play this character. So Disney, or Marvel in this particular case, is weighing the options of when they're going to be able to get her on there. And if it's not a top priority right now, then cool. Then absolutely cool. I mean, Miss Marvel makes a lot of sense because we pretty much can figure out that Miss Marvel is going to be in Captain Marvel 2 whenever that officially gets announced, which it hasn't yet. And also the fake news coming out about a writer that someone had updated their IMDb page to say that they were writing it, and they're a little bit left-leaning or really left-leaning, and that got some people to attack them. I mean, this is the age we're in when it comes to this kind of fake news and this kind of fake world, is that all of these scoops, they get dropped and then people run with them. And I do the same thing. I'll run with scoops when I get them, but I try to look at them as being objective and try to find as much info as I can. Sometimes it's hard to do. In this particular case, I do give quite a bit of credit to Charles Murphy, who is saying here, I can be wrong. Let's wait for the evidence to come out. And there's that. Now, I will kind of, again, point to the other side here, and I have to kind of laugh my ass off a little bit at one thing. So yesterday he ran the scoop, right? That the show was delayed indefinitely. He ran it out there and everyone followed. Everyone ran along with it. Everyone was on board with it. No one questioned it, right? Here's this scoop. Then today, Julia comes out and just says, nope, not true, totally inaccurate. And his response back is, yeah, according to her, it's she calls it completely inaccurate, and that's about it. I just find that to be an interesting way of going about it, right? Well, I've got this inside source that says this is true. I report it. Someone else comes out and says, well, my source says this isn't true. And then he drops everything he says and goes, well, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm okay if I'm wrong. Let's wait for the whole thing to come out. Again, I give him credit for admitting he can be wrong, but there's this weird kind of, I'm not too sure how to describe it. It's a weird place to be where it's like you think you have something, but then another source comes out and counters it, and you kind of immediately back down. I mean, we've seen other situations where that hasn't happened, conflicting reports and then drama ensuing. But it just goes to show me that if Julia, who is a tech writer for The Verge, who covers mostly YouTube, is saying that her Disney source says that it's not true, that's immediately taken as being fact, when yesterday everyone took his source as fact. It's a weird weird world to be in. And in this kind of roundabout news 24/7 cycle that we get ourselves into, it just causes a bit of problems. But anyway, those are just my thoughts on it. It's a crazy story overall, and I do want to hear what you guys have to say about it. So let me know your thoughts, your opinions. I want to hear them.